Well, good morning, everyone. Okay, I, as usual, I look like I just woke up. For those of you watching this on video. All right, well, you guys, welcome to a brand new episode of Hot Topics. My name is Gabrielle, and I will be your host, as I'm always your host. But yes, welcome to a brand new episode of Hot Topics. If you are unfamiliar with this show, let me tell you what this show is about. So, this is a show where we like to have that real talk. We like to talk about things in mental health, physical health, employment, education. We like to cover a lot of different ground here, and we like to explore things from an educational perspective as we are a part of A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So today I am excited about today because we have a brand new topic and we have a repeat guest. I love it when I have repeat guests on this show. So first off, let me tell you the title of the show. So the title of the show is Boundaries. That's right. The title of the show is Boundaries, and we are going to get into that today. So I'm sure, that's a hot topic right there, right? So we're going to get into that today. And my guest who has come back, I believe this is her third time on Hot Topics, so she is familiar with the hot seat. She's going to help us with this discussion. So, her name is Dr. Ashley Funk. She has the coolest name in the world. And, let me just remind you about who she is. So, she will be our guest for today. So, let me get right into it. Who is Dr. Ashley Funk? Let me tell you who she is. So, Dr. Ashley Funk is the owner and founder of Paradise Psychology in Fort Worth, Texas. As a licensed psychologist, Dr. Funk specializes in the treatment of anxiety disorders and helping caregivers manage unwanted behaviors displayed by their children. She is also passionate about helping her clients improve their relationships through open, effective communication and healthy boundaries. Dr. Funk enjoys spending her leisure time with her fiance and their two cats, Honey and Luna. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to bring Dr. Funk to the stage. Hi, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for coming back.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, so today we're going to have a discussion about boundaries. So, you already know the drill. So I'm just going to let you just dive right in and you know, say what you got to say.
Yeah, so first and foremost, like Gabrielle said, I am a licensed psychologist in the state of Texas. I do need to kind of say a little disclaimer. So, even though I'll be talking a lot today about boundaries, please do understand that nothing that is talked about today or that I say should be a substitute for psychological services like mental health counseling, formal diagnosis, or anything like that. So, please do not take this as a psychological service. This is just meant as information and nothing more than information for you. However, if you're listening live, please feel free to put in questions and I'll do my best to give you some expert answers in that respect. So, boundaries. So, I like to always start with why are boundaries important? So, boundaries are important not only in our relationships, but for ourselves. So, not only do we, establish boundaries with other people, we can establish boundaries with ourselves. And there are a lot of different types of boundaries that we can set. So we can set boundaries that are physical boundaries. So things like, hey, I'm not comfortable with hugs. I only want a handshake, or I'm not comfortable with that type of affection or that type of touch. We can set, spiritual or religious boundaries. And those are things like, I don't want to have those conversations, or, I don't feel comfortable having a discussion with these certain people or in these certain arenas. Like, hey, we don't discuss these things at work, or we don't discuss these with certain family members if there are things that are very emotionally heated. Same can be with like political. We can set even boundaries in regards to intellectual boundaries. So these could even be things like, hey, I made an invention and I have intellectual property. That is a boundary. You can't take my intellectual property. We can even set boundaries that are emotional boundaries, such as, you can't sit there and insult me or call me names. That is also a boundary, that's communicative or emotional boundaries. There are just so many different areas where we can set boundaries with other people, and boundaries we can set with ourselves could even be boundaries like, if, for instance, I have a habit of, right before bedtime, I want to sit down and eat an entire bag of, box of Oreos, or, container of Oreos. Maybe a boundary I set with myself is, after 8 o'clock at night, I'm not going to eat anymore, because I know that if I eat an entire container of Oreos and I try to go to sleep, I'm going to have a stomach ache. It can be things that are large or small. And a lot of times where people, will come to me in my office is when they're having more the relationship boundary issues, whether it is too rigid of boundaries. So this can affect the relationships where these are the people that keep people very much at a distance. They have difficulty establishing or maintaining those boundaries because people see them as being very rigid. And, they may say no a lot, and people find them a bit abrasive. And then on the other extreme, we have the people who lack boundaries. And these are the people that have a hard time saying no. They are people pleasers, and they tend to put other people first ahead of their own well-being. So they are exhausting themselves and burning themselves out because they're constantly giving, 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 but they're not on the receiving end. And so these may be the individuals who run into toxic people who will take and take and take and bleed them dry, if you will. And so I see that the most in my practice, where people kind of lack those healthy boundaries, and then we have to kind of work to empower them to build up that defense system that is healthy boundaries.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. All right. So you gave us a lot there. We gotta
Mhm.
unpack all that. All right. So let's get into what is a boundary. So like how do we, I guess, how is it defined in the mental health community in terms of uh like what is a boundary? What if we could give
Mhm.
it a definition, what can we say?
So, in the best way I can define it in the most simplistic terms is, a boundary is any kind of rule, if you will, or expectation you set that there's a consequence to it. So if you set an expectation or rule, whether it's with yourself or another person, and say, this is my expectation of you or of myself, and if this expectation is not upheld, this is the consequence, that is a boundary.
Hmm. So it's like it's like rules that we put on ourselves, whether it's as a way to keep ourselves in line or to
Yeah,
keep
so you
others in
can,
line.
yes. So it's, we know what we are or are not willing to tolerate
Mm.
or accept. So I always tell people, I'm like, we teach other people how to treat us. So if you allow somebody to treat you a certain way without establishing a boundary, you've taught that person it's okay for them to treat you that way. So if they treat you poorly and you keep letting them do that and don't set that boundary, you've taught them it's okay to treat you poorly. So by establishing that expectation of, if somebody comes in and they call you a name and you don't do anything, they're going to do it again because there's no consequence. And you don't do anything. But if you sit and say, that's not okay, don't call me that, they're going to know that the expectation is, oh, she doesn't like being called this name. She expects me not to do it. So if I come in and I do it again and I say, if you call me that name, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to walk out. Well, that's a consequence. You come in, you call me a name, I'm going to walk out. That's a consequence. So now I've set that expectation of I'm not going to interact with you if you treat me poorly.
If you don't follow my rules.
Right.
So why are boundaries why is it so difficult? I guess one, for people to follow, and two, for people to sorry, there's a fly. Or two, for people to establish themselves. I guess that's two different questions that I'm asking. So let's start with one. So why are boundaries so difficult for people to set for themselves?
So that's a complicated question, and there's a
Mhm.
few different reasons that could be. One is, okay, so one reason that it could be difficult is if the boundary was not initially set, it's going to be more difficult to set later on. And that comes down to the basic fact that people don't like change inherently. So, and the reason for that is it's the whole, don't rock the boat. We have this kind of like homeostasis, this equilibrium that we're working on. And if you rock the boat and you kind of create that change, so if you're an individual that lacks healthy boundaries or lacks boundaries, think about who that's benefiting. If you're, a yes ma'am, yes sir, and you are always, putting other people before yourself and you are allowing other people to take advantage of you by not having boundaries, that's going to benefit the other people. So they're just like, yes, I can take from this person, and this person will continue to give all of their resources to me. Well, that's great because they're benefiting from that tons. But all of a sudden, if you come in and you're like, well, I'm going to establish boundaries now because I'm burnt out, I can't do this anymore, that person doesn't like that because now they're no longer benefiting from your willingness to always say yes and not have those boundaries. So that change is not a good change to them. It's a good change for you, not for that other person anymore. So there's going to be some backlash and some pushback because that person doesn't want that change. So that makes it very difficult to set those boundaries later on. If that kind of, norm has been established that I'm always going to say yes. Another reason it can be really difficult is, as children, if we grow up in a household where there are certain expectations set on us that, we are supposed to be the nurturer, we're supposed to be the people pleaser, we are conditioned to be certain ways. That is, part of the reason that as we become adults, we are who we are. When we grow up in a household, our families, our caregivers model certain things for us. So if it has been modeled for us, not having healthy boundaries, because some of us grow up in households that have really good boundaries, some of us don't. And that, is just a fact. And if we, unfortunately grow up in a home where there are not healthy boundaries, that is not something we necessarily have learned in our youth, is how to establish those healthy boundaries. So as we become adults, we lack those tools or those skills to establish healthy boundaries in our relationships as an adult. So we are sitting here trying to play catch up with our peers who have developed those skills as youth. And so that can also make it quite difficult for some individuals because it's kind of like, we're trying to do this like boot camp of, all right, let's catch up to everybody else that, had these years and years and years of development to get to this point that like now I'm realizing, oh, I need to start doing this, sooner rather than later. And so we're kind of unlearning everything we've been conditioned to know as a child or as, an adolescent and relearning how to function as an adult. And so those are kind of the two primary reasons I see it can be really difficult. The third reason I can see is you have to kind of determine if there's another person involved that you're trying to establish a boundary with. Is the other person a healthy person or an unhealthy person? And so, throughout our lives, we're going to interact with people that are quite healthy. And then every once in a while, we're going to interact with someone who is quote unquote toxic. And if you're trying to establish a boundary with someone who's a rather toxic individual, that can make establishing boundaries very, very difficult because some unhealthy or toxic individuals do not have the capacity to respect or adhere to boundaries when they're established or when you try to establish them with them. And their tendency is going to be to push and push and push and push and not want to respect them. And so there are certain strategies you kind of have to like really work, and it can be very fatiguing for the individual trying to establish or maintain those boundaries. And it's going to be like a longer learning period for that unhealthy or toxic individual trying to learn how to like adhere to them. So those are kind of the three reasons I can see that it's usually quite difficult to establish or create those healthy boundaries.
So in hearing you explain that, I'm wondering if it does trauma play into that as well, and that maybe you established a boundary and like you brought up religious boundaries. So one of the things, like one of my religious boundaries is I don't eat pork, right? So when I'm going to like family gatherings and they serve pork and they know I don't, but but they offer it anyway, and I say no, and then I get ignored or I get shut out or I get shunned. Um it's and that can be traumatizing, for some people. So does trauma also yeah, definitely a religious is a big one,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you don't eat certain foods, um or I mean I'm assuming maybe for vegans, for example, um it's a big thing when you don't eat meat. It can be traumatizing for people, especially young people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So does trauma also play into uh the setting boundaries and how difficult it is to set boundaries?
Absolutely. And, I think a big part of that in some respects is when there is any instance of like a trauma bond. So if somebody has like a significant history of like trauma, especially if it's familial trauma, there is sometimes that trauma bond. And so establishing boundaries with the individual who is, a toxic individual, whether it's someone, excuse me, someone who might be like a perpetrator or an individual that they have a toxic relationship with, that, communication with that individual may be unhealthy or they need to limit interactions or the type of interactions they're having with that individual. It can be very, very difficult because certain tactics that are used, they may try to guilt that person and manipulate and be passive aggressive and use all these tactics to stir up certain emotions in that individual and be like, why are you being so selfish? And like try to like I said, guilt that individual into like putting that boundary away and no longer having it, because again, maintaining that bond, that very unhealthy connection serves the unhealthy individual more than it serves the individual who's trying to heal and maintain that healthy boundary for their own well-being. And so it can be very exhausting because you have to maintain this like heightened awareness. And that's part of it is, like you have to be very aware of what's happening in the moment, because if you allow your emotions to kind of override that decision, then it's easy to kind of fall back into those patterns and say like, yeah, you're right, I'm sorry, like I shouldn't have said that or I shouldn't have done that, rather than to say like, no, like I have to go, or I'm hanging up the phone, or we're not doing this. It is very, very difficult to do, unlike with someone who maybe there's more distance with, or is a healthier individual and there's like this kind of healthy relationship. You can go in with that expectation of this person is going to hear me, they're going to respect my decision, they're going to adhere to that boundary. If you're going in with like a toxic individual, you don't have those expectations. You don't know what the response is going to be, or perhaps you do when it's going to potentially plan for worst case scenario. But I do absolutely think, there has to be, when trauma potentially plays a factor, you have to kind of plan for all potential outcomes when you try to establish that boundary.
All right. There's a lot I want to say about that, but in the interest of time, I want to jump into the other question I said. So why is it so difficult for people to follow boundaries once they've been established? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so the individual who is trying, has established a boundary to maintain it, you have to keep in mind the consequences. So a boundary is not a boundary without a consequence. And it's, same thing. I know we had, previously spoken about managing behaviors, unwanted behaviors of children. Same thing, same principle. A consequence is not an effective consequence if it doesn't mean anything to the other person. So this is what you have to think of. Like it has to be a consequence that you're willing to follow through on. Don't say if you're not going to do it. So, like don't say like if you call me a name, I'm never speaking to you again. If you're going to call that person up again, don't do it. Don't threaten something you're not going to do, because that just shows that you don't mean what you say. And so, it may be more realistic to say, if you call me a name, I'm going to hang up the phone, or I'm going to walk out. Say something that you reasonably can expect to follow through on. And, again, consistency. If the person breaks the boundary, follow through consistently on the consequence. And, the third reason is people have a tendency to think, oh, well, they just made a mistake. Yes, people make mistakes. It is, as much of it's a change for you to establish and maintain that boundary, it is a change for the other person. And again, going back to, people inherently don't like change. And it goes back to that whole status quo. Usually if, there's a lack of boundaries, a lot of the time it benefits the person that is, has an advantage to the other person not having a boundary, especially, if it is a thing where like they're getting something out of you not having a boundary. It is, there's like, well, you used to say yes all the time, or you used to let me do this. Like, what's going on? Why are you so different? I don't know you anymore. Like, a lot of times, I have people come in and say like, wow, that did not go well. Other times I'll come in and be like, wow, it went a lot better than I thought it was going to go. And like, I was really shocked. It is kind of that feeling of like, why is this different? If you've ever gone up to somebody and they had a response that was just like out of left field, and you're just like, I did you wake up on the wrong side of the bed? Like, what's going on? It is kind of that utter shock, and you have to give that person a little bit of time to get over that shock. But show that like, nope, this is the way it is. Like, I understand that this is not what you're used to, but this is how things are going to be from now on. And, whether it's like, I'm not going to tolerate that behavior anymore, or like, I'm just stretched too thin. I cannot take on any more work or any more projects or whatever it is. And just making sure, you communicate that information. And another reason is people making boundaries too convoluted. And what I mean by that is when you set a boundary, don't expect the other person to adhere to it if you are not clear and specific to say exactly what you expect or what you want. People cannot read your mind. So you have to say exactly what it is that you are expecting or wanting in regards to that boundary, and make it concise. If you sit there and you make a lecture out of it, your message is lost. And the other person's eyes are going to glaze over. And at the end of it, they're going to be like, I have no idea what this person just said to me. And it's going to go in one ear and out the other. So it has to be clear and specific, concise. So one sentence, done.
All right. Straight to the point. Right? To make it complicated. So now what about a common one when, for women and you have, men that, want to holler at them, right? Hey baby, can I buy you a drink? Or the cat calling, and it's the unwanted flirtation from men, or maybe from women, putting it out there, but unwanted, flirtation from other people. How does that work? Because I've had my experiences with men, and I've said no, and they kept being persistent. So it's what do women do in that situation?
I think this goes down to the messages. Okay, so as a female, this comes down to, a lot of the messages that we receive from society of like, oh, if you're assertive, that means, you're B word.
Mm-hmm.
And
you mean a bitch? You could say bitch.
Yeah. So it means like, like if I'm assertive, I'm a bitch. Mm-hmm. And I always say like, so what? So what? Fine. Call me a bitch. I don't care. And, I think in instances like that, be assertive. It is a lot of the time, straight face, eye contact, say it like assertively. I do not appreciate you speaking to me that way. And if you continue to speak to me that way, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to walk away and I'm going to ignore you. Knock it off. Like it is just like done. Like not playing around. Stop. And, it is obviously you have to, observe the setting and make sure you're safe. But, and have there been situations, I've been in situations where I'm like, this is not a safe setting. Where I've been like, all right, cool. I'm going to get on my phone. I'm going to act like I'm talking to my friend. And then I'm just going to be like, I'm going to hightail it out of here. But there have been situations too, where, I've had somebody basically cut me off, put their finger in my face, and I flat out looked at the person. I'm like, you put your finger in my face one more time, I'm going to bite it. So, which I'm not going to say I'm like, proud of that moment, but it's been said. So it is, sometimes we have to be assertive with what we're saying. And at the same time, recognizing that a lot of times some of us are conditioned to be quiet in those moments and allow mistreatment. And that is not how things should be. We have the right to feel safe and secure in our environments, and to have our, how do I want to word this? Have our desires respected and our boundaries respected. So, it is that whole adage of no means no. So when I tell you no, you should respect that and leave me alone.
That's, I mean, you brought up a good point that there's times where you have to be assertive in your boundary. Um Especially like if you feel violated, you really have to put your foot down and say no. But then there's another thing that you keep bringing up is like the consequence. So you have to tell people that there is a consequence if you violate that boundary. So it's you can't just say no, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's if you do that, this will happen, right?
Yes.
So it's so I just if you could, let's dive into that more. It's we have to do more than just saying no, don't do that, no, stop. We have to say
Mm-hmm.
that there is a consequence if you do that.
Yeah, and it is. And like I said, whatever that consequence is, you have to be willing to do it. So it is, sometimes to take it to an extreme, sometimes that consequence, if there are small boundaries with small consequences, and there are big boundaries with big consequences. So, taking it as a small boundary, if somebody, their boundaries we set all day long and we don't think of them as boundaries, but they are. And a small boundary could be anything of, like sitting on a public bus and somebody encroaches on our space. And so we shift over in the seat like this
Yeah.
to like not make physical contact with them. That's a personal space boundary. We have our bubbles and we don't like people getting in our bubbles.
Yeah.
So if somebody gets in our bubble, some people might scoot over to like get away from them, whereas other people are going to start throwing elbows like, get out of my personal space. Either way, our boundary is don't enter my space, and the consequence is either I'm going to shrink away from you and like not make physical contact, or the other one is I'm going to start throwing elbows so you move over. Either way, that is a consequence to that. And a big boundary would be if you enter my physical space aggressively, whether it is physically aggressive or sexually aggressive, and I tell you no, and you do not respect that, a big boundary would be, I'm going to fight you. I'm going to fight back. And, that can be also a boundary as well, as I'm going to scream. I'm going to start fighting back. I'm going to defend myself. And it is, all of these things are boundaries when you look at it. Those are two very, very ends of the spectrum. There are many, many, many things in between. But, in so much as, a boundary can be as simple as, and I will say this. So let me back up a little bit. A boundary is not always something you do, or a consequence is not always something you do. It is sometimes something you don't do. Sometimes it is if somebody calls. A boundary and consequence can also be something you don't do. It can be not answering that text message, not picking up that phone call. So it's not always something you do. It can also be something you don't do. So for instance, if you set a boundary with somebody and you're like, hey, I'm busy between this time and this time, I'm at work, and they keep calling you, don't pick up the phone. Don't answer the message. Don't look at that text. Don't respond to that text. Mm-hmm. That is also a boundary and a consequence for that person. So it can also not be doing things. So I know that I just confused everybody probably. But it is getting creative with those things. So sometimes, it is doing something, but it also can be not doing something. So it could be, not doing that. And I always tell people, you don't really owe anybody anything. A lot of times we were conditioned to feel that way, like somebody did something for us, or somebody, says this or says that, and I need to pick up the phone, or I need to do this, or I need to do that. No, you really don't. We have just kind of this gut urge of like we see certain names pop up on our cell phones and we're like, oh, gotta get that. No, no, you don't. You don't need to pick that up. You don't need to respond to that. You see that comment on social media? You don't need to reply to that comment. You can ignore it. And if you feel the urge, do you need to do it right away? No. And sometimes that is a boundary you can set with yourself as well. Is I don't look at social media at these times of the week or these times of the day, or I don't respond to phone calls or messages or Facebook comments or whatever it is until so many hours has passed, or if I'm feeling like really angry or I'm feeling really anxious, or whatever it is. Like, those are things that you can also do, like boundaries you can set as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So it's setting the consequence for breaking a boundary can be things that you do and also don't do. Mm-hmm. Right? So something that you do would be, if you break that boundary, I'm going to punch you in the face, right? If you want to be aggressive. But another boundary could be what you don't do. So if someone breaks that boundary, I'm not going to pick up the phone. I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to ignore you. Right? So technically you are doing that thing that you're not doing. Yeah. If we want to be philosophical, but yeah, it's things that you are adding to the situation.
Yeah.
Like a violent punch, or if you're taking away from the situation, like being quiet. So either way, that there are multiple consequences, but what's important is to establish a consequence, right? So it's not just saying stop. Mm-hmm. You want to establish a consequence. So now, do we have to say what the consequence is, or is it just enough to just kind of do it passively?
So I typically advocate for saying what the consequence is going to be. So obviously, going back to kind of the potentially life-threatening emergency situation of it, if somebody's physically aggressing or sexually aggressing towards you, like, no, that is not a time where you need to sit there and say, I'm gonna physically attack you. No, somebody, if it's a life-threatening situation, defend yourself, do what you need to do to survive. But for more everyday, normal boundaries that you're establishing, I usually advocate for tell them what the consequence is going to be. So, if you're on the phone with somebody, especially, I hear this a lot from people who work retail, because we know, everybody that works retail has at least one of these stories where a customer gets really angry and starts using some colorful language towards them. And, usually company policy is customer is always right, and you have to sit there and just kind of take it. And like, nobody really deserves to be spoken to poorly. And so without returning the colorful language, it can be, sir, ma'am, I do not appreciate you speaking to me in that manner. I'm going to ask you to stop. And, consequence could be, if you continue to speak to me that way, I'm going to hang up. And so, right there, I'm going to hang up is the consequence. And so, yes, you're saying it quite level-headed, but you're telling them, like, this is my boundary. I don't want you to speak to me that way. Stop speaking to me that way. Consequences, I'm going to hang up if you continue to do it. So that they continue, like, cussing you out. Consequence, hanging up on you. Same, can go for family. Like, if you continue to criticize me, you continue to call me names, I'm going to hang up. Or like, you've called me 5 times today. I'm at work. If you continue to call me, I'm not going to answer in, consequence. or it can be something as simple as, I'm really overworked. I can't take on any more stuff. Like if you keep asking me to take on more projects, I'm going to have to tell you no. Consequence. I'm telling you no. It is just as simple as, just telling them exactly what's going to happen. So by telling them what's going to happen, it lets them know and decide for themselves whether or not they're going to break that boundary you just established. And it also gives you valuable information of whether or not the consequence that you've set was effective or valuable to them. Because keep in mind, the consequence that you set has to be something that that is averse enough for them to not want to break your boundary. So if it's not adverse, then obviously it's not an effective boundary. But you won't know until you tell them what it is.
So what about if there's like a power dynamic? Like if you, like how do how do you establish boundaries with your boss? How do you, maybe children have to establish boundaries with their parents, So what if there's a power dynamic?
Carefully, very carefully. So, it has to, you have to look at the situation in that respect. And it has to be something that is clearly a breach of whatever is going on. So I always tell people, if it is a work environment issue, what are our avenues? So we have to look and exhaust and really look clearly at, what are our options? What exactly is going on? And what is the best route to take? Is it going to the superior directly? And how do we need to word this to make it clear but non-threatening? And so this is usually where, usually I'd be like, be very assertive.
Mm-hmm.
When there's a power dynamic, I'm usually like, all right, let's put a little softening onto it because we don't want to be super assertive and threatening and come in there and be like, nah, because usually that's not received super well by superiors. So it usually is also talking to the other person like, okay, what are all of, again, that comes into the planning of potential outcomes. Given all of the potential outcomes, are you willing to accept whatever might happen? So if a potential outcome is you get terminated, is that a potential outcome you are willing to accept? So benefits, risks, balance. And sometimes, unfortunately, it comes down to that. So if you have a superior that has a tendency to overload you with projects and overwhelm you, and you're getting burnt out, and you really want to set that boundary and say, like, I can't take on anymore. I'm working overtime all the time. In fact, I'm working off the clock. It's burning me out. I'm stressed out. And you want to go and set that boundary with your supervisor and say, like, I cannot take in anymore, or I am going to quit. Okay. But are you prepared for are you prepared to follow through with quitting if your supervisor is like, fine, quit? Like, are you prepared for that? Or are you prepared, like, if you go in and say, like, XYZ and they retaliate, are you prepared for that? Or, with a child going to a parent and the parent then returns the favor and, like, grounds them or yells at them, are you, making sure we've exhausted all those potential outcomes and looked at and said all of these potential consequences to establishing that boundary? Are you prepared to experience that, and how are you going to respond?
So it's a little different, in that, so we're not saying, if there is a power dynamic, we're not, you can still establish a boundary, but it's, you just being aware that the response to those boundaries uh, may be very aggressive, may be very harmful.
Yeah, potentially. And, it is sometimes when there is that power differential, it is something to be aware of. That, we don't know how things are going to play out. We cannot predict or control another person's behavior or the response to that establishing of a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
So it is preparation for doing that.
Right. Right. But then you have some people that, just sticking to the job part, that they may say like, oh, I really need the job, so I have to just deal with it, you know. What do you say to those people?
It I'm not here to judge. So, I've had people come in and say ultimately like I can't afford to lose this job, or I can't afford to do that. As much as I wish my situation were this, I can't risk it. And that's fine. Like, I'm not here to judge. And if this is not a safe place, because, establishing boundaries and open communication takes a safe environment a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And if the environment is not safe, then it's just not. And, I respect that. And if the risks outweigh the benefits of establishing the desired boundary, then so be it. And then it is more moving towards, okay, so this is your reality and your situation. So how do we deal with that? And how do we manage it in the best way that we can?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right. Well, there's so much more, we could get into, but we got to start to wind things down. All right. So, do you have any final words of wisdom that you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah. So I think when it comes down to boundaries, if you kind of know boundaries in your life that you want to set, whether it's with yourself or with other people, set them early, set them often, clear, concise, specific, and, don't be afraid to tell people what you want, what you expect, and to communicate those consequences.
All right. Beautiful. All right. So, Dr. Funk, thank you so much for this lovely conversation today. And now it is promo time. All right. So, you guys, Dr. Funk is all over the web. So, she has a long website, which will be in the description. But it's Paradise Psychology, PLLC hyphen DRA funk.clientsecure.me. So she has a really long URL, but don't worry, all of this is provided to you in the description. So I encourage you to go to her website to learn about her services. We also provided her phone number there, which is 682 273 8501. She is also on Instagram and Facebook under Paradise Psychology PLLC. And she's also on LinkedIn under her name, Ashley Funk. So I encourage you to follow her on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. And, if you are looking for so counseling services, right? You can reach out to Dr. Funk. She is available. I'm assuming you're taking new clients.
Yep.
All right. And are you virtual, in person? How does it tell us about your business?
Yeah, so I do mental health counseling. I offer in-person and virtual services to any residents in the state of Texas.
Okay. Wait, so the virtual services are only for people in Texas?
Yeah, so the way that works is because I am a licensed psychologist in the state of Texas. If somebody lives outside of the state of Texas, I unfortunately cannot offer them services because you have to be licensed wherever the client resides.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So it's only for Texans, you guys. Sorry about that. But hey, listen, if you happen to be from Texas and you're listening right now, or if you know anybody from Texas that can use the services, definitely reach out to Dr. Funk. Again, I'll just say her long URL. It is Paradise Psychology PLLC hyphen drafunk.clientsecure.me. And her phone number is 682-273-8501. And she is also on Instagram and Facebook under Paradise Psychology PLLC, and she is on LinkedIn under her name, Ashley Funk. So if you are looking for mental health services, please reach out to her. Follow her on social media. She's there, right? So for any of y'all in Texas, please reach out to her and check her out. All right, Dr. Funk, thank you so much for joining me today once again.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Great. All right, I'm gonna place you backstage now, and you guys, it is you and me. All right, so you guys, we have reached the conclusion of our episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please check out our other episodes and don't forget to follow and subscribe. And while you're at it, please let us know what you thought about this episode by leaving a comment in the comment section or in the comment thread. I definitely want to hear your feedback about this website. And as a reminder, this podcast is a production of A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So if you would like to learn more about us, our company, the services that we have to offer, please visit our website. Our website is www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. We are also all over that social media as well. So check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, WhatsApp, and Eventbrite. So please check us out through all of those means. And I also want to let you know that we have a special promotion going on right now for new clients, and that if you mention that you heard about us from Hot Topics, we'll give you 15% off 6 hours of tutoring. So I'm just going to say that one more time for new clients. Reach out to us if you're looking for a tutor, whether for yourself or for your child, and you mention that you heard about us from Hot Topics, we'll give you 15% off 6 hours of tutoring. So definitely take advantage of that discount, you guys. And I also encourage you to sign up for our email list and our texting list. You'll receive exclusive offers, promotions, discounts, special announcements, everything that is A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So I encourage you to sign up for our email list and our texting list. That information, of course, is scrolling below at the bottom of your screen if you are watching this on video. But if you are listening on audio, that information is in the description. Okay, you guys, I'm just going to share this final message before I close out.
Hey there, have you heard of us? We're a small team of tutors here at A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. We believe that education and information should be accessible to everyone, regardless of income, race, or creed. We're dedicated to making this happen, but we need your help. Please consider making a donation to our company. No amount is too small. Your donation will allow us tutors to remain employed. Offer free and low-cost services, put on productions like this podcast, and reach out to families nationwide. With your help, we can tackle the academic challenges of our students and the emotional, mental, and behavioral changes that result from these challenges. As a bonus, we can improve our communities in the process. Support us today. Send your donation by Cash App to $ASATS2013, by PayPal or Venmo to @ASATS2013, or by Zelle to success@astepaheadtutoringservices.com. For our Facebook Live viewers, you can also send us a star. Your support means a lot to us. Please note, we're a for-profit company. We're not a charity. Your donation may not be tax deductible. Please consult a tax professional.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sorry, before I close, I just realized it didn't show up on my screen here. But I'm streaming this right now to my personal profile, and a couple of comments just came up. One says, basically sticking to your guns is a boundary. Yes. And another comment is not confusing at all. So I don't know why I don't see that here on StreamYard, but basically there are a couple of comments. Just wanted to quickly point that out. All right, you guys. So we are done for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm so confusing with the joining me. Anyway, thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode. And I look forward to seeing you at the next episode. Thank you so much, you guys. And now I am signing off. Bye.